remind ourselves of what we're doing. So we're still in the thick of this this question. The basic question is, what was the order of all the avodot that the Kohen Gadol did on Yom Kippur? And what we saw in the Mishnah, which is in the Gemara and Daf Ayin Amud Aleph, we saw the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, which we'll take a quick look at again. And then we saw the much of the sugya in the Gemara, which is trying to understand Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, because as they appear in the Mishnah, they are incomplete. Their shitot are incomplete. And we're trying to put together a complete picture. So along the way, we learned some various things, and one of the things that came up was, both according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to Rabbi Akiva, this was sort of a secondary but important issue. If there were, how many elim were brought on Yom Kippur? So in Acharei Mot tells us that there's an ayil that the Kohen has to bring he brings an ayil, and he brings an ayil for the Am. And we also learn in Parshat Pinchas that for the Korbanot Musaf, one of the Korbanot that is mentioned is an ayil la'olah. And all three of these are mentioned as being an olah. So there's a machloket about whether or not the ayil that appears in Parshat Pinchas is in addition to the elim that are mentioned in Acharei Mot, or is it the same as the ayil la'am? And what we saw as we went through and we looked at the charts that I made and so forth, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, they do agree on this. They agree that the ayil that's the Korban Musaf that's mentioned in Parshat Pinchas is the same ayil as the ayil ha'am that's mentioned in Acharei Mot. And just a second. In terms of the, we'll look at that in a moment also. So this is what we should do. Let's just remind ourselves from the Mishnah. We'll start with the Mishnah. I'm not going to go through the entire sugya, but we'll summarize the sugya based on the charts that I made. But just to remind us, here in the Mishnah, this is what it says. That so this is coming on the heels of the Kohen Gadol having read the parashot of Yom Kippur in the Ezrat Nashim, and he had the option of wearing the bigdei boots or putting on his own piece of clothing. And so the Mishnah begins here by taking the option of he had read in the bigdei boots, then he has to wash his hands and legs. He has to go down, he has to strip and go down to Tavel, and then he gets up and dries off. They bring him the bigdei zahav, and he puts on the bigdei zahav, and once again will wash his hands and legs. Then he goes out and he does his ayil and the el ha'am. That shivat kvasim t'mimim b'nei shana divrei Rabbi Eliezer, and also 7 kvasim unblemished that are a year old. So so we know what the ayil and the el ha'am is. Those are the ones that are mentioned Acharei Mot, and as will be more plain later, those are the only 2 elim that are brought, right? So there isn't a third one, but the el ha'am is the one that's identified with the one that's mentioned in Parshat Pinchas. What are the shivat kvasim being brought for?
It's Musaf.
That's the korban, right? So this is an integral part of the korban musaf. The korban musaf is a par, an ayil, and 7 kvasim that are all olot, and then also a series in the chatat, which we call the sir anaseh bachutz, to contrast it with the sir chatat, whose blood was sprinkled inside, lifnai lifnim and lifnim. So at this point, this is what Rabbi Eliezer is telling us, that at this point in the day, he's going to change his clothes, put on the bigdei zahav. He'll bring his ayil and the el ha'am, and also shivat kvasim. He's going to bring 7 kvasim, which is part of the musaf. Now, of course, what's missing from Rabbi Eliezer, and we have not yet seen this in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer is now introducing the part of the musaf, but we haven't seen where the rest of the musaf is brought, right? What about the par? What about the sir anaseh bachutz? So he doesn't say, and we haven't, in all of the Mishnayot that we've done until now, we haven't seen it mentioned. But this is what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Akiva says, "Im tamid shel shachar hayu krevim." So he says that the 7 kvasim were brought with the tamid shel shachar. So he's saying that those kvasim of the musaf, those were brought right after he did the tamid shel shachar. Upar ha'olah, which is also from the musaf. So he's adding in now a little bit more of the musaf. He's saying the par ha'olah, which is part of the musaf, usir anaseh b'chutz, which is also part of the musaf. These other parts of the musaf, im tamid shel ben ha'arbaim, those were brought with tamid shel ben ha'arbaim. So he fills out more of the Seder Hayom. But what we see is that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Shivat Kvasim, those are going to be brought now along with the Eilim. And we don't know exactly what he thinks about the Par HaOlah. And we also don't know exactly what he thinks about the Sir HaNaseh B'chutz. But we do know that Rabbi Akiva disagrees with him about Shivat Kvasim. And in contrast to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva says the Shivat Kvasim, those are brought with the Tamid Shel Shachar. So if we take a quick look at the charts, just a second. If we take a quick look at the chart, we have Rabbi Eliezer de Tana de Beis Shmuel, which is what the Gemara introduces as being the proper way to understand Rabbi Eliezer. This is his Seder Hayom, that with the Tvilah Rishona, when he's wearing the Bigdei Zahav, that's when he brings the Tamid Shel Shachar, and that's also when he does the other Avodot associated with the Tamid Shel Shachar, the Ketoret and the Neirot. And the Tfilah Shniya, when he's wearing the Bigdei Lavan, this is what we'll call Avodah Shel Yom, right? This is the main Avodah that he's going to do inside of the Beit HaMikdash, in the Heichal and in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. That's when he'll do the blood of the par and the sir chatat of the par of the Kohen and the sir chatat of the Am. Then he'll change his clothes again. And this is what we're up to in the, this is what we would be up to now. The Ayil HaKohen and the Ayil Ha'am, plus the Emurei Chatat. The Emurei Chatat are the fats that were left from the par of the Seir, right, that he sprinkled the blood for. But you'll notice in this chart, it doesn't have the Shivat Kvasim here. Doesn't have the Shivat Kvasim here. According to that the way it's brought down in the Mishnah you would think that the Shivat Kvasim would be here. This would be the time, because it's after he's done the laning. He does the laning in the Bigdei Lavan or in his own Chaluk, but it would be after this time. But in the Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana de Beis Shmuel is not the same as it appears in the Mishnah. For those of you who want to follow up, I brought you also Rabbi Eliezer of the Tosefta. The way Rabbi Eliezer appears in the Tosefta lines up more with the way it is in the Mishnah. But we're just going to leave that for now. Because here what happens, he brings the Elove El Ha'am Emurei Chatat, then he tavels for the fourth time, puts on the Bigdei Lavan for the second time to be Motzi Kafu Machteme Kodesh HaKodeshim. Then he's going to tavel again, put on the Bigdei Zahav, and that's when, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he's going to do the Musaf. He does it in the fifth Tefillah. He brings the Par, the Shivat Kvasim, the Sir Naseh B'chutz. All of those he's doing now in the Bigdei Zahav at the end of the day, before he does the Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim. And then he'll finish off by doing the Ketoret in the Meirav. So that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva, Gemara says, we do Rabbi Akiva according to Rabbi Akiva the Tosefta. And here we have two versions of Rabbi Akiva the Tosefta. So we're going to, for our purposes right now, we're going to look at Rashi's version. And eventually, I think we may have time today. I want to come back and talk a little bit about this. I showed you the Rambam. The difference between Rashi and the Rambam is specifically about when the Tamid Shel Ben, when the keves of the Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim was done. Was it done according to the Rambam? The Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim was done after, while he was wearing the Bigdei Zahav for the second time, which is the third Tefillah. And according to Rashi, it's done which might seem more intuitive, it's done when he's wearing the Bigdei Zahav for the third time, the last time, at the end of the day. That's when he's actually going to bring the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim. Okay, but this is the way the order goes. But Ben Kach Uven Kach, right? According to all opinions, here, Rabbi Yoaz and Rabbi Akiva, there is only one ayil. So let's look, I think this is where we're going to pick up. So we're now here in the Gemara, in the sheet that I gave you. It's Daf Ayin Amud Bet. Okay, Michael's leaving. Okay, we'll see you another time. Here we go. So Dukulay Alma Mihat, but according to everyone, nonetheless, Chad Ayil, it's only one ayil, meaning there's only one ayil of the Am. There's going to be two Elim, right? Because there's one for the Kohen and one for the Am. But it means there's one ayil that's being spoke of, both in Parshat Pinchas and in Parshat Achrei Mot. The ayil of the Am that's mentioned in Achrei Mot is the same ayil that's mentioned in Parshat Pinchas. And this is what Rashi says: "Dekulei alma miha bein l'Rebbi Eliezer bein l'Rebbi Akiva chad ayil hu detzibur." There's only one ayil that's brought for the tzibur, for the community at large. Dekulhu amri, because all of them say el ha'am v'lo ayri ba'ayil hakatzuv b'chumash ha'pekudim klal. They're not talking at all about the ayil that's written in Chumash HaPekudim in Bamidbar. So Kiman. So who is the Manda Amar? Who is the person who says that the aisle of Achrenot is identified with the aisle of Parshat Pinchas? Karebi. This would go like Rebbe. So I think I mentioned this last time, but just so you understand, of course, Rebbe is very late, right? He's the end of the Tanaim. Rabbi Yezer and Rabbi Akiva precede him by some period of time, about more than 100 years. But when the Gemara says something like this, it doesn't mean that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva knew Rebbe and agreed with his opinion. It means that Rebbe is expressing an opinion that predates him. But we have it, the version that we have, the tradition we have, comes from Rebbe. Right? But it's him transmitting that transition. So because this is not what it means. Who do Rabbi Yezer and Rabbi Akiva hold like? They hold like Rebbe. Okay, so that sounds weird because they never knew Rebbe, but it means they hold like the opinion that Rebbe expresses, Ditanya, because we learn in a bright. So Rebbe Omer, Ayil Echad Ha'amur Kan, Hu Ha'amur B'chumash HaPkudim. So the Ayil Echad that's mentioned here in Vayikra, where it says the Ayil Echad La'olah, that's the same one that's mentioned in Parshat Pinchas. Just a sec. Let's bring that up. Oops. Okay. Yeah. Right. So this is the Parshat Musafin in Parshat Pinchas for Yom Kippur, and it says Vikravtem Olah Lashem Reich Nichoach Par Ben Bekar Echad. That's the Par of the Olah on the chart. Ayil Echad Chasim B'nei Shana Shivat Tamimim Yyu Lachem. So that's the question: is what's this Ayil Echad? So Rebbe is saying this Ayil Echad is identified with the El Ha'am, which is mentioned over here in Parshat Acharei Mot, where it says, "Umeit adat b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei sirei izim lechatat ve'ayil echad le'olah." It's the same ayil. So that's what Rabbi says. Rabbi Omer ayil echad ha'amur kan in Parshat Acharei Mot hu amur b'chumash hapkudim. That's the same ayil that's mentioned in Bamidbar. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi, and he says, Shnei Elim, they're two Elim, they're two separate Elim. Echad Amur Kan, one of them is said here in Acharei Mot. Echad Amur B'chumash HaPkudim, one of them is said in Parshat Pinchas. Mai Ta'ama de Rabbi, what's Rabbi's reason? What's his reasoning? Tichtiv Echad, because it says Echad. My Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he'll say my echad. What does echad mean? Miyuchad shebe'edro. So let's understand what's going on here. So the echad, that's the lashon of the Torah in Parshat Acharei Mot that we just saw, where it says U'meit adat b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei sirei izim lechatat. The ayil echad le'olah, because the Torah could have just said v'ayil le'olah. When it says ayil echad le'olah, the implication is that there's only one ayil to bring for the am. So the ayil that's mentioned then in Parshat Pinchas, and also it also says ayil echad in Parshat Pinchas. So that ayil echad, since it says it ayil echad and ayil echad, there can only be one ayil. There's only one ayil to bring, and that's how Rebbe understands the psukim. So that seems to be a reasonable argument. So what does Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon say? My echad, what does echad mean to him, if not to say that there was literally just one ayil? So he says that means miyuchad shebe'edro. Echad here it's not used to mean a number. It's not telling me to bring just one ayil. It means to say echad, meaning like the one and only. It's the best one. So the ayil that's brought has to be something special. It has to be miyuchad shebe'edro. It has to be special in its flock. So that's also a good drasha, right? So what does Rabbi have to say about that? Because how would Rabbi know then otherwise that you have to bring the best of the flock? So Rebbe learns it out from a different pasuk altogether, which applies for all korbanot tzibur. The pasuk is this pasuk here in Dvarim. V'haya, it's at the bottom of this page that I have. I'll just read it. V'haya ha'makom asher yircha Hashem Elokeichem bo l'shaken shemo sham. This is the parsha where the Torah is talking about the way korbanot. It's the idea that you can bring, you can eat meat outside of the Beit HaMikdash, but your korbanot you have to bring to a Beit HaMikdash. The place that Hashem chooses to have His name dwell within, Shama Taviyu. That's where you should bring Et kol asher anochi mitzaveh everything that I command you. Olotechem, v'zivchechem, masrotechem, v'trumat yadchem, all of these korbanot and masrot, v'chol mivchar nidrechem, all of the choice, meaning the choice animals of your nidarim, asher tidru l'Hashem, that you're going to vow to bring to Hashem. So you might ask here, it says mivchar nidrechem, maybe that only applies to nidarim, and we're talking here, there's a different, neder is something that's still nonetheless, that's voluntary, but here we're talking about korbanot tzibur. So the Gemara elsewhere talks a little bit more about that. For the moment, we're just going to take it at face value, that this is the source that tells us that any korbanot that you bring has to be from the best of your flock. So what Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon, okay, Rebbe nafkali mimivchar nidarecha. So Rebbe learns it. Rebbe learns this idea that all of the korbanot have to be the best. He doesn't need a special pasuk to tell me that the ayil has to be the best of the flock, because he learns it as a general rule. It always has to be the best of the flock, because I learned it from Mivchar Nidarecha. So this is the face-off between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar. But Rabbi Shimon, Rebbe he's still holding by this idea that that there's only one ayil that's brought for the am. And this question of how do you know that it's the special one, because he doesn't darshan echad to mean special, he darshans it to mean the number one, that there should only be one. So he learns that from Mivchar Nidarecha. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he says, Chad b'chova, v'chad b'nedava, u'tzriche. One of them is for a chova, and one of them is for nidava. So he's indirectly or maybe directly addressing this question. Chad b'chova, the ayil echad, to tell me miuchad shebedro, I need that because the ayil is a chova, it's not a neder. So I need to have a special pasuk of ayil echad to tell me miuchad shebedro. And since I say that echad means special and not one, it means I actually have to bring, aside from the ayil of the Kohen, I have to bring two elim for the people. And both of them have to be miuchad shebe'edro. I wouldn't learn it out from Mivchan Nedarecha because Mivchan Nedarecha is talking about nidarim, which is a type of a nidava, something you give voluntarily. Utzrichi, and I need them both. So Rashi says, Utzrichi sheyesh dat notel lomar. In other words, I need the Torah to indicate to me that whether you're bringing a chovah or whether you're bringing a nidava, it always has to be the best of your flock. That's the tzrichi. I need both of these concepts to be expressed by the Torah. What's the tzrichi? So Rashi says, sheyesh dat notel lomar, because our mind might lean in one direction to say, nidava muvcheret, kedei shtei mekuberet b'ratzon. You might say that the Torah is going to want me to go out of my way to bring the best of the flock, dafka for a neder, because I want it to be accepted b'ratzon, right, with Hashem's will. Hashem we want Hashem to willingly accept it. And the implication seems to be that because it's a voluntary korban that I'm bringing, I have to go out of my way to make it the best possible korban. So that would be the tzad to say why I need the pasuk of Mivchar Nedarecha. I need the Torah to tell me that if you're bringing a neder, you have to bring the best of your flock because this is something you're doing of your own volition, so you have to go out of your way to do it in the best possible way. You could also argue the other way, that since if you're bringing something as part of an obligatory sacrifice, you would bring the best of them, so that you'll do the chovah in the best possible way. You'll fulfill your obligation in the best possible way. I think there's more to be said about this tzriche, about each of these sides, but it's touching on an interesting point, which is which has more input, or not input, maybe which has more value, or which do I want to have greater input from my side as the person who brings the korban? Do I need to have greater input or add greater value to something I'm doing voluntarily, or do I need greater input or value for something that I'm doing out of an obligation? To my mind, it's reminiscent of the question that's the Gemara elsewhere, the Gemara in Kiddushin, where it talks about mitzvot, that women are p'turot for mitzvot aseh shezman grama. The Gemara there says, "Gadol hamitzuveh ve'oseh mishe'enu mitzuveh v'yoseh." That the person who is commanded to do a mitzvah is greater than the person who wasn't commanded to do the mitzvah and does it. But you could also argue, and Rashi, if I haven't looked at this recently actually, but Rashi there says, if I remember correctly, because he's commanded to do it, he'll be more careful in the way he does the mitzvah, because he was specifically commanded to do it, as opposed to someone who voluntarily does a mitzvah. since they weren't commanded, they don't necessarily have to be, or they won't psychologically maybe psych themselves to be as careful in how they do the mitzvah. You could, of course, also argue the other way around, that somebody goes out of their way to do a mitzvah for which they're not commanded, and already they're showing this initiative that maybe they should get a greater sachar than a person who was commanded, because they have to do it. They have to do it anyway. Anyway, I think it's an interesting question which we might revisit sometime. It seems to me it's a parallel thing here, right? That according to Rabbi Yozar, Rabbi Shimon, I need the Torah to tell me both for korbanot chova and for korbanot nedava that you need to bring the best of the flock. And you could argue each side. You can argue each side about why I might think otherwise, why I might not learn one out from the other. Idea of tzrichuta, is that if I only had one, I would not learn out the other, right? So I need the Torah to tell me these two things, both for chovah and for neder, because otherwise I wouldn't have learned it. If I have only learned it for chovah, I might think it's only for chovah, then I have to bring miuchad shebedro, but not for neder and vice versa. What we get out of this in terms of the overall sugya, this is kind of a side issue, but it's nonetheless something that we needed to address, and that is this question of how many Elim were brought. So all of the charts that I did were based on the Gemara up until now, where there's only one El Ha'am, right? That the Ayil Ha'am that's mentioned in Acharemot is the same Ayil Echad that's mentioned in Parshat Pinchas. So that's a bit of a side issue, but nonetheless. So now we're going to go back and continue on where the Gemara picks up from the Mishnah. So in the Mishnah, let's just roll back here a little bit. We saw the machloka between Rabbi Yoezer and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so we have their machloket, and we've fleshed out their machloket in greater detail in the Gemara and in the charts that I brought. So then, once that part is finished, in other words, the part that we're talking about here, the machloket between Rabbi Yoezer and Rabbi Akiva, ech shelo yiyeh, is what does he do after he's done avodat hayom in the bigdei lavan, and parenthetically after he's laned, right? The Torah doesn't talk about him laning, but it's after the laning. But after he's worn the bigdei lavan for the first time, and he puts on the bigdei zahav, what does he do next? That's the core of the machloket that's brought here in the Mishnah. And as we saw from the Gemara, and as is laid out in the charts, it actually has implications for other parts of the day as well. But that's what we're up to here in the Mishnah. So the next part of the Mishnah is, okay, once he's done whatever he's going to do in the bigdei zahav, now he has to put on the bigdei lavan for a second time. Kidesh yadav v'raglav upashat, and he strips down Yoad v'tavav yelav v'nistapeg evilo bigdei lavan v'lavash. So now he's going to wear the bigdei lavan for the second time. Kidesh yadav v'raglav, after he's put on the bigdei zahav, because so Mishnah, that's the only thing he does. He just goes in the Kodesh HaKodeshim where he left the censer and the kolpan that he had brought in when he first wore the bigdei lavan to burn the Ktoret inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now he's going to put on the Bigdei Lavan for a second time and go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim in order to remove them. And in the Mishnah, that's the only thing that he does. It's the only thing he does with this second wearing of the Bigdei Lavan. And then after he's taken out the kafel machzeh, then what does he do? So he's going to go wash his hands and legs again. He's going to strip down. He'll tavel. He's going to get up and dry off. Then he's going to put on the Bigdei Zahav for the third time. This is the fifth tefillah, and now he's going to be wearing the Bigdei Zahav to finish off the rest of the avodah that he needs to finish today. And what does he do? So now he goes into burn the incense for Bein Ha'arbayim and Tivat Haneirot. Once again, it doesn't tell us when he brought the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbayim. And that's, as I mentioned, this is a machloket between Rashi and the Rambam. And then after that, he's going to wash his hands and legs again. He's going to strip down, and then he gets to put on his regular clothes, and that's the end of the day. So when we get to this part here in the Gemara is picking up from when he has gone to put on the Bigdei Lavan for the second time, to go inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim to take the kafel machzeh. Tanu Rabbanan. So the rabbis learned in the Braita, Uba Aaron el Oha Moed. Lama Huba. Why is he coming? Lotzi et hakafeh et hamachzeh. Shekol parasha kula ne'emra al haseder chutz mipasuk zeh. So, what are they darshaning? Back to looking at the psukim in Nachrei Mot. This is what the Rab. Tu v'aron el moed v'shad bigdei habad asher lavash bevoel hakodesh v'hinicham sham. Aaron comes to the Ol Moed. He strips off the linen clothing that he was wearing when he came into the Kodesh, meaning in this context, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and he leaves them there. So the Gemara here seems a little strange, right? But this whole pasuk is strange, and we've commented on it many times, because the very act that it describes seems bizarre, right? It says that he goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and strips down and leaves his clothes there. So it just sounds very bizarre. Like, what could that mean, that he would strip naked in the Kodesh HaKodeshim? It doesn't seem likely that that's what it means. So in the plain pshat of the Gemara, this is what the Gemara is picking up on. And the Gemara is picking up on this question of what exactly is he going in to do? Because the Torah doesn't really describe anything that he's doing, any kind of avodah, that the only thing it's describing is that he's going to strip naked. So the Gemara answers, he's going in specifically to remove the kaf and the machzeh. That he has to do that because that was something that he started earlier that he now has to finish. And now the Gemara also comments that Shekol Parashat Kula Nemra Al HaSeder Chutz Mipasuk Zeh. That this whole parsha is said in order except for this particular pasuk. So what does that mean? So we looked at this before, but let's look at this again. The other thing I want to tell you, there's a short Rashi here that we're going to look at. This part of the sugya that we're seeing now on Ayin Amud Bet or is it Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph? It first appears earlier in the Masechet, appears back on Lamed Bet. And I do want to go back and see it in its context in Lamed Bet, but I haven't decided yet if we're going to do that today because I wanted to lay it out for you, but maybe we'll just do it. Wait, what was I looking for? Okay, hold on. Let's just, again, we're going to this, we're just going to remind ourselves again about this whole thing with the order. What does it mean that this pasuk is out of order? How did Chazal know that this pasuk is out of order? So I'm bringing up now the psukim the way I laid them out some time ago from Achrei Mot. And that's here. So let's just understand again what's going on. According to the Torah in Achrei Mot, it starts to describe the avodah of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippurim, and it starts off by telling us that he has to bring par l'chatat and ayil le'olah. He has to bring a seir, shnei sirim l'chatat, and an ayil for the am. And then it also proceeds to tell us the avodot that are pertinent to those particular korbanot. Now, and it tells us that all of these avodot have to be done in the Bigdei Lavan, right? It's explicit in Parshat Achrei Mot that he has to do these avodot in the Bigdei Lavan. One among the things that he's going to do is before he starts to bring the blood of the par and the seir into the Kodesh HaKodashim, he's going to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim and bring Ketoret to make a cloud inside of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And only then is he going to be able to go in and sprinkle the blood. So then he'll have to do these other things with the Sir Azazel and so forth. All of these, but nonetheless, what's being described here in Achrei Mot are all these things that he's doing in Bigdei Lavan. So it doesn't start from what he must have done prior to Achrei Mot, which would be to bring the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, and possibly to have already brought the Korbanot Musaf or some of the Korbanot Musaf. That's not mentioned here. But we know that he does have to do that because the Torah says elsewhere that you have to do that. You have to bring Korban Tamid every day, and then there's a special Parshat Musaf that tells you have to bring a special Musaf on Yom Kippur. And those things he's going to be doing in the Bigdei Zahav. Now, how do I know that he does those things in Bigdei Zahav? We know it essentially by default because the Torah goes out of its way to tell us the things that he specifically has to do in the Bigdei Lavan. So it implies that those other things that he does every day, or he does for the Korban Musaf, which are not explicitly mentioned here in Achrei Mot, presumably those things he's going to do in Bigdei Zahav. So if we think about it, if we're reading Achrei Mot and we're trying at the same time to fuse it together with what we know from Parshat Pinchas about Korban Tamid and Korban Musaf, then our order would be, he starts with Tamid, Musaf, that would be in Bigdei Zahav, and that would be the first Tevilah. Then he would tavel, and he would put on the Bigdei Lavan. He would do the avodot that are pertinent to Bigdei Lavan. So that would be all the way up through when he sprinkles the blood from both the par of the Seir L'Chatat. Then he would also do the Sir L'Azazel. Then he would also do the Sir La'azazel. And then it says, and that's when we would get up to Pasuk Kaf Gimel, Ba'aron el Moed of Lashana Bigdei Abad. Then he would remove the Bigdei Abad and leave them in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. That's what we would get from reading Parshat Achrei Mot. And then what would he do after that? Then presumably then he would be putting on Bigdei Zahav for the second time. And then what would he do? Then he would bring Elo ve'el ha'am, he would do the Haktarat Emurim of the Parvus Seir, and that would be the end of the Avodah that he does, except that we would also add on to that, and then after that he would do the Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim. So if I only have the psukim in Acharei Mot and the psukim in Parshat Pinchas, my conclusion should be that he's going to wear the Bigdei Zahav twice, and he's going to wear the Bigdei Lavan once. And so it would end up that he would tubble 3 times, and he would be Mikadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim 6 times, right? 2 for each time that he changes clothes. And that would be that. And so it should be simple. So why does it become so complicated? It becomes complicated because Chazal had a Kabbalah that he has to tavel 5 times. He has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim 10 times. So why does the Gemara say that this pasuk of when he goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and takes his clothes off, he takes off the Bigdei Lavan and leaves them there? Why did they say that that's out of order? Why do they say it's out of order? It seems to be, at least it does seem to be in the correct order. It's just that it feels like I must be missing something if I need to also now take into account that he has to do 5 tevilot and not 3 tevilot. Is that clear? Right. I'll just say it again quickly. If I read Parshat Achrei Mot and I read Parshat Pinchas, and I need to meld the two, right? Because I know he needs to do all of these things. He always needs to bring the Korban Tamid, he needs to bring the Korban Musaf, and then I have this special parsha that tells me special things that he has to do in addition to that on Yom Kippur. And I want to know what order he does everything. So I know from elsewhere, he's always going to do the Korban Tamid first and last, right? That I learned from Parshat Tamid. I don't know exactly where he's going to do the Musaf because there are different indications, but he's going to do the Korban Musaf. Shuto Shel Inyan is that he would do the Musaf with Tamid Shel Shachar, but we'll just leave that as a question. Exactly when he does the Musaf, I'm not sure. What I also know is that those are avodot that he does. Tamid he does every day, Musaf he does every Chag. So those are not otherwise indicated as being done in the Bigdei Lavan. So he's going to do them in the Bigdei Zahav that he does for everything. And now I come and I read Achrei Mot. Of course, technically I read Achrei Mot first, but okay. But now I'm going to go back to that's significant. But for our purposes, now I'm going to go back and read Achrei Mot. And Achrei Mot just is mainly describing to me, most of Achrei Mot is describing to me avodot that he's going to do in addition to the Tamid and the Musaf that is particular to Yom Kippurim. And those most of what is described in Achrei Mot are these avodot that he needs to do in these special clothes, in Bigdei Lavan, right? All the way up until Pasuk Kaf Gimel, where he removes Bigdei Lavan and leaves them in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So, and then the rest of the parsha is like finishing up things that he started earlier. So that's he still has to bring the chaylev of chatat. He has to bring the chaylev and burn that. He has to do and he has to bring the elim, right? Because so far in Achrei Mot, up until Pasuk Kaf Gimel, he has not yet brought the elim that were mentioned earlier. Okay, so Achrei Mot, so this is what I would think. First, he would do the Korban Tamid in Bigdei Zahav. Then he'll change. He'll do Parvus Se'ir L'Chatat. First he'll bring Ketoret into the Kodesh Kodeshim. He'll do the blood of the Parvus Se'ir L'Chatat that's special for Yom Kippur. He'll get the Sir Azazel ready and sent off. And then he'll go into the Kodesh Kodeshim, and he's going to, I'm just going here with Pshat, he's going to remove his clothes, but then he has to go out, beginning in Kaf Daled, to do other avodot. He has to finish off now. So Kaf Daled tells us that he's going to bring the Elim, because it says Yatzav Yasat Olotov Olat Ta'am. So what is that? So that's what's mentioned earlier. Those are the Elim. And then he has to bring the Chele Chatat from the Chataot that he brought earlier. He has to burn that. And then it tells us also that the carcasses from the Korbanot Chatat, they have to be taken outside and burned. Okay, but all of these other things, after beginning with Haftalet, since he's removed the Bigdei Lavan, so what will he be wearing now? He'll be wearing the Bigdei Zahav. So once again, if I'm looking at Pshuto Shel Mikra, he's going to start the day with Bigdei Zahav to do Korban Tamid. He's going to change and do most of the avodot that are particular to Yom Kippurim in Bigdei Lavan. Then he's going to change again. He's going to bring the Elim, and then presumably Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim, right? And those will all be Bigdei Zahav. So what would it come out? That he only changes clothes. He only really changes clothes twice, right? Because he puts on Bigdei Zahav, Bigdei Lavan, Bigdei Zahav. And so that would mean, because we learn out that he has to do a tefillah for each one of those, that he would tavel 3 times. And he would do Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim 6 times, right? 2 for each of the tefillot. So that's what we see. However, the Gemara had a different understanding of this. So now let's look a little bit more at the Gemara. So the Gemara here says, Tanura Banan, Ubaron el Oa Moed, Lama Huba. What is he coming for? He's coming in to remove the Kaf Maktan. And like we said, so even though it doesn't say that explicitly in the Torah, it's telling that the Chazal are filling that in, because why else would he be going into the Kodesh HaKodeshim? He's done all of the other pertinent avodot that he had to do with sprinkling the blood, but he left the Kaf and Maktev from earlier, so presumably he has to go in and get that. And about this question of why it's phrased in this funny way, that he goes in and he strips, and it doesn't even mention that he removes the Kaf and Maktev, we will return to that. We'll return to that question, but part of it is Chazal is just introducing what should be logical. That is, since he brought the Kaf Machteh in earlier, at some point he needs to remove them. So it's as if the Torah is telling me that because it's obvious that that's what he has to do. But the funny part, again, is Then the Gemara says, "Shekol parashat kula ne'amra al haseder chutz mipasuk zeh." Everything here is said al haseder except for this pasuk, except for the pasuk of removing the kaf from the machtah. So why does the Gemara? It's a Braita? How does the Braita come to that conclusion? So let's read a little bit further in the Gemara. My ta'ama. What's the reason? What's the reason of the Braita to say that this pasuk was said out of order? I could easily say that everything is in order, and the way I described now, he would do bigdei zahav, he do korban tamid, bigdei lavan does all the avodat hayom, and now after this pasuk, he'll just change in. He'll let Bonagid. He removes the kafu machteh in bigdei lavan, and then he changes to bigdei zahav, and he does the rest of the avodat hayom and korban tamid shel bein arba'im. I could just say that. Why do I have to say it's out of order? Everything seems to be in order. So he says, you have to begin with this tradition. You have to begin from this point that Chazal had a tradition from Sinai that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol toppled 5 times and washed his hands and legs 10 times. And if you say that these psukim are written in order, everything is proper the way I see it, then you will see that there's only going to be 3 tevilot and 6 kiddushin, the way we described. Right? Because the Torah doesn't interrupt anything in the middle of him wearing the bigdei lavan. From the time he puts on the bigdei lavan, he does avodat hayom until he goes in to remove the kaf and machteh. And then the rest of it he does after, presumably then in the bigdei zahav. So if you say that that's the proper order, you end up with 3 tevilot and 6 kiddushin. So how are you going to get 5 tevilot and 10 kiddushin? So the implication is that you're going to have to change the order of something to have it come after he did avodat hayom in bigdei lavan. Something has to come after that he does in bigdei zahav, so that he can change into bigdei lavan a second time to remove the kafu machteh. So what could that be? It must be something that's mentioned after pasuk kav gimel. After the Torah says that he goes into the kodesh HaKodeshim to remove the kafu machteh, I'm going to have to take something from after that and put it between the removal of the kafu machteh and what he did earlier, avodat hayom. And that once I change one thing, in other words, I'm going to have him wear the bigdei zahav one more time in between, that immediately means that he's going to have to go to the mikveh 2 more times. Right? Because he starts, Shutosh Mikraz is bigdei zahav, bigdei lavan, bigdei zahav. So that's 3 tevilot, 6 kiddushin. If I'm going to take one more thing that he does in bigdei zahav and stick it in the middle, so it goes bigdei zahav, bigdei lavan, bigdei zahav, bigdei lavan, bigdei zahav. Now I have 5 tevilot. Now I have 5 tevilot and 10 kiddushin. So this particular part of the sugya, I'm going to want to look at this a little more carefully. I'll show you here. Rashi says, "Shekola parasha kula nemra al seder the whole parsha is set in order. If it was written in order, the Ken Haseder Shemot Tziyan Bil Bisha Rishona, and also that the order that we find them in all the things he does in the first wearing of his clothes, meaning from the beginning of the day, Ve'en avodah chitzona shel bigdei zahav mafseket. And if we continue to say that the avodah chitzona, the avodah that he does outside of the kodesh and the kodesh kodeshim, which he does in bigdei zahav, if there was no avodah that he does in bigdei zahav, that was mafseket ben avodat hayom lahotzat kafu mafteh, lo mashkechet la. That Rashi is saying basically what I just explained to you now. If I don't insert avodah that he does in bigdei zahav between what he did to begin with in the bigdei lavan and hotzat kafu mafteh, if I don't insert something in between there, I'm not going to end up with chamesh tevilot and eser kiddushim. So I have to insert one of the avodot that, or at least one of the avodot that's mentioned after hotzat kafu machteh. I have to insert it earlier, so that the time that the Achrei Mot describes of him as having him wear bigdei lavan is interrupted by wearing bigdei zahav, so that he can put on the bigdei lavan a second time and go in to remove the kafu machteh. So this sugya is fleshed out a little bit more elsewhere. Just a second. So what I'm thinking is, I think what we'll do, it's 1:45. I think what we'll do, we're going to do it next time. For those who want to look, it's the Gemara on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. Let's see. I'll show you the Gemara, but Bezrat Hashem, I'll prepare sheets. Rashi, as he says here, he says he explained this already. There's several Rashis and a couple of longer Rashis that explain this more or less the way I've been trying to explain it, because how would I know, except that Rashi taught me. But if you look in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Bet Amud Aleph, it's from the part that begins Tanura Banan, Uva Aron El Moed, Lama Huba. In other words, it's the Braita that we're doing now. It's brought first on Lamed Bet Amud Aleph, and this is where it goes into this question. The other reference, which I'm hoping we'll do next week, is, if you have time, look at the Ramban in Achrei Mot in Vayikra Tet Zayin on Pasuk Kaf Gimel. Uva Aron El Moed, and the Ramban talks about our sugya here and about the order, and he also does bring down differences of opinion about the order that we've already touched on. But the Ramban, of course, is always a good reference for these things. He's trying to give us a deeper understanding of the meaning of the order and what we're supposed to learn out from all of this. So I think this is a good place to stop. Anyway, we will get through this. My general intention is, once we finish through this sugya, But we're going to finish off the Mishnayot till the end of the parak. Of course, that won't all happen until after Pesach, but hopefully not long after Pesach. We'll finish till the end of Parak Shvi'i. And then we're going to start Parak Shmini, right? So Parak Shmini, I'm planning to do it something along the lines of what we're doing now, where we're not going to necessarily do every Gemara, but because Parak Shmini contains a lot of halacha l'maaseh and also a lot of important conceptual things that we should be thinking about on Yom Kippur, I want to do a selected sugyot in Parak Shmini, so that by the time we finish, the plan is going to be to finish Parak Shmini before Yom Kippur. I may actually schlep it out till that time, maybe not, but there's a lot to do. And since we've spent so much time on Yoma, I do want it to be that when we come into Yom Kippur this, for this coming year, that we will have spent a lot of time on learning the halacha l'maaseh. I think by the time we finish Parak Shvi'i, as Paul has alluded to more than once, maybe we'll have a better understanding of the Seder Hayom as it's brought down in the Piyutim of Chazarat Hashatz for Musaf, which, by the way, I'll just throw in, Rishonim looked at those Piyutim as being sources, like from Gaonim, about how to understand the Gemara. It's not just, it was not seen simply as nice poetry. It is beautiful poetry, but you understand when you're reading it now that whoever wrote them had to understand these sugyot in great depth. And so later Rishonim looked at them also as source material to understand these sugyot, which is quite interesting. Anyway, that's it for now. Any questions, comments, criticism? No, okay. So thank you for bearing with me. This is all.
It's getting clear.
Okay, that's the thing. You have to keep going over and over again.
Yeah, over and over, forward and back, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the more you go over, I'll throw this in. I saw this, and maybe you also saw this. It was circulating on Facebook, and maybe I'm sure in other sources as well. That Rav Kanievsky, Zichrono Livracha, had a Seder Hayom where I don't remember the whole thing by heart, right? But he did so many prakim of Tanakh every day, so many daf Gemara, so many daf of Yerushalmi, so many Pirkei Mishnayot, so many Pirkei Zohar, and all these things. These are the things he did every single day, so that Bein Hayeter, he would do a siyum on Tanakh and a siyum on Yerushalmi and a siyum on Bavli every year, right? And a siyum on Shas Mishnah. He did that, right? So he went through them every year. He did that for part of the day, and then the rest of the day is when he wrote his chidushim and wrote his books. And this is something that, in my limited, I was zocha to meet Gedolim, Rav Savitsky, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Elyashiv. This is one of the things that they all had in common. People think that they were brilliant and they had like these photographic memories, and they knew it. They were always going over the same things again and again and again, and then they would take time to introduce, like to take the thoughts that they learned after each, after so many times of going over the same material. That's when they really start to understand it. And I've noticed this for many years, and I'm guilty of this as well, that I feel like the way we were brought up, we were not brought up with this idea that there's an inherent value in constant review. In fact, almost the opposite. Like in schools in the States, I don't know, Paul, you could comment about how you grew up, but here it's a limited value. There's a very limited value for reviewing your work. That basically you review what you learned in order to pass the test. And then once you've passed the test, it's not that important anymore because you need to learn the next stuff for the next test. So the idea that there's a core curriculum that you're constantly reviewing, we don't have that. The people that get that kind of discipline, I think, are musicians and sports people, right? Because those are two disciplines where you have to do the same things over and over and over again, right? So it's not the same kind of learning, but it is a kind of learning, right? Where you're constantly reviewing. Like if you're a musician, you're going to constantly do scales, right? You're always going to do scales. Ballet dancers, even the greatest ballet dancers, I know this from my ex-wife who used to dance ballet, the day after a premiere performance, the next morning they have to do a bar, just like they do every single day. They do it, the most basic exercises they do every single day. They never miss a day. So it behooves us as B'nai Torah to review our Torah. So that's my point. I think this is a life lesson we learned from Rav Kanievsky and from many Rabbanim and Talmidei Chachamim. So, and Michael here, as you attest, the more you go over it, little by little, it does start to make sense. Like you can start to hold it all in your head.
Yeah, it sinks in. Yes, yes. I agree.
We should all be Zochen. Okay. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.